So thank you very much everyone for joining today's webinar titled Cooling Beyond Cities, Scaling Rural Space Cooling and Thermal Comfort. My name is Gennai Kamata, and I'm an Associate Program Officer working on buildings and cooling at the United Nations Environment Program, or UNEP. I also facilitate the Cool Coalition and Global ABC Passive Cooling Working Group, which works to accelerate the adoption of passive cooling strategies and support policymakers in developing enabling frameworks for integration into building policies. It is a pleasure to welcome you all to this edition of Cool Talks, the UNEP Cool Coalition webinar series, bringing together policymakers, practitioners, and experts working to accelerate sustainable cooling solutions. Today's focus is rural space cooling and thermal comfort, a dimension of the cooling challenge that remains significantly under-addressed. According to UNEP's Global Cooling Watch Report 2025, more than 1 billion people lack adequate cooling, with the most vulnerable in rural areas of Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. While rural cooling discussion often centered on cold chains and food systems, thermal comfort in homes, schools, and health facilities remain largely invisible in policy and investment. To address this gap, today marks the launch of the Cooling the Last Mile, landscape mapping of space cooling solutions for rural Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, a report developed by Energy Saving Trust under the Efficiency for Access Coalition. The report maps passive and active cooling solutions for rural contexts, identifies gaps, and proposes context-specific approaches to enhance thermal comfort and climate resilience where they are needed most. The challenge is equally urgent in Southeast Asia. Next week, I'll be in Manila for the launch of the roadmap for the passive cooling in the ASEAN region, developed by ASEAN Center for Energy and the UNEP Cool Coalition and Global ABC. This is a strategic framework for mainstreaming passive cooling in a region where cities could face up to 120 days above 35 degrees Celsius per year by mid-century. Together, these two publications make a significant steps in building the evidence and policy architecture for sustainable cooling beyond cities. Before we begin, a few key housekeeping notes. So this session is being recorded and will be shared on the Cool Coalition website and YouTube channel. All participants are mute. Please ensure that your speakers are muted. And also please submit questions through the Q&A function, and we will address them during the discussion. So with that, over to Florencia Sales, Energy Access Research Analyst at the Energy Saving Trust for the main findings from the Cooling the Last Miles. Florencia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gennai. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. It's great to be here. Well, it's great to be here. I am Florencia Saras. Gennai said, I work at Energy Saving Trust as a researcher. And today, I have the pleasure of presenting the key findings of Cooling the Last Mile. The research we conducted collaboratively over the past year focused on mapping space cooling solutions applicable to rural settings in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. This report launched today, as Gennai was saying, and it focuses on trying to better understand the key gaps and pathways to scale of these rural space cooling solutions. I want to start by thanking all our co-authors and partners that worked together with us in this research. It truly was a collaborative effort, and the outcome was really enriched with our diverse expertise and experience. So just to briefly introduce us and the program behind this research. Energy Saving Trust is co-Secretariat of Efficiency for Access and delivers the Low Energy Inclusive Appliances Program, or LEIA for short, which focuses on research and innovation to improve performance, affordability, and availability of appliances in off-grid settings, and ultimately enhance clean energy access for world's most underserved communities. So this research really sits at the core of our work, and I want to start to set the context of why this research was needed, and more research in the same topic is still needed. So as most of us know and can feel sometimes, heat waves and extreme heat are increasing their duration, intensity, and impact worldwide. And projections show that Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia will face acute impacts or is already facing them. As you can see in the two maps on the right of the slide, which show the average percentage of heat-related deaths in different countries. The one above shows the 90s decade, and the one below the 2010s. There is a clear trend of specific regions in the world where there are acute impacts of heat. And rural communities in these regions are particularly vulnerable. They face a set of compounded and mutually reinforcing challenges that make it harder for people to cope to rising heat. These three challenges, which you can see in the little diagram there, are first, inadequate infrastructure, especially the lack of adequate rural housing and buildings infrastructure that many times trap heat indoor and offer no thermal protection. Second, limited access to electricity, which constrains the use of or the accessibility to appliances that can then provide thermal comfort. And third, the affordability barrier, which means that even low-cost improvements are out of reach for these underserved households. In 2024, SE4All estimated that over 300 million people living in rural areas are at high risk due to lack of access to cooling. That 300 million is a worldwide number, but out of that number, 155 million are in Sub-Saharan Africa, and almost 105 million are in Central and South Asia, meaning that rural population at high risk in these two areas are the biggest share in the world. And yet, despite everything I just said, and also as Genai mentioned, rural communities' cooling needs are absent in global cooling agendas. And we identified a gap in knowledge of what solutions exist to address these needs. So what did we do? We undertook this collaborative landscape mapping. We knew that this topic needed interdisciplinary effort, and we brought together lead universities, research institutions, and practitioners from different geographies. Actually, two of our co-author organizations are going to be here with us in the panel, Huda Jeffer from Selco Foundation and Bea from Jeresh. And yeah, I'm very looking forward to hear the discussion in a few minutes. But yes, so our research aim was twofold. First, to map the space cooling solutions applicable for rural areas. We mapped 13 in total, as you can see in the diagram there. 4 active cooling solutions, including off-grid fans, evaporative air coolings, and novel evaporative air coolers, high-efficiency air conditioners, and 9 passive cooling solutions that you can see in the diagram, ranging from cool roofs to different types of insulation, ventilation, and shading techniques. The second aim of our report was to support decision makers understand what factors affect the performance of these solutions. we wanted to equip them with a clear vision of what is out there and what works, where and why. So to achieve that, our report also included the development of this 7 criteria framework, which aims to convey the trade-offs when implementing a space cooling solution. These 7 criteria that you can see on the slide go from the climate suitability of the solution, meaning does it work in hot, dry regions or hot, humid regions or both, to the ease of its implementation. For example, does it require full refurbishment of the building for the solution to be effective? And we also went into analyzing higher level factors like supply chain resilience, where we considered if the solution requires local or imported material or components. In general, our idea with this framework was to shift the question to, well, from what is the best solution to what factors impact the suitability of these solutions for a specific context. Just briefly for you to see how this looks at when seeing 2 different solutions. Oh, sorry. Here, for example, off-grid fans, you can see that they have low complexity in terms of ease of use and implementation, since they are a plug-and-play appliance. But due to low regulation, markets are flooded with low-quality products, and quality assurance is a challenge. On the other hand, cool roofs have a higher complexity in implementation, since a coating needs to be applied to the roof, but they can more often be locally available. So they have a higher resilience to supply chain. I just want to say that this does not mean that we have to choose between these 2 solutions. Many times they come very well together, but I'm just trying to show the type of assessment that we did with each of the solutions that we mapped. Now I'll just share, let me just share a couple of our key findings with this research. The first one is that passive cooling must be the foundation for rural thermal comfort, since passive cooling measures are more often lower cost and appropriate for off-grid contexts. Moreover, they reduce the heat load, so when active solutions are needed, they become more effective and more affordable, since you need a smaller capacity appliance or solar system. And these solutions are usually context appropriate, since they draw from traditional techniques, and which this makes local implementation more viable. And another thing we identified with passive cooling is a real potential for cross-regional adaptation. For example, the China mosaic roof that is used in India, and you can see in the image, has potential to be adapted and transferred to other regions or other areas in Sub-Saharan Africa or in South Asia. Our second key finding, or bundle of findings, is that while passive measures are essential, active cooling appliances remain critical, especially in certain contexts like healthcare facilities, schools, and where extreme heat and heat waves are prevalent. In active cooling, we also identified a strong scope for transferring and adapting solutions cross-regionally or to different contexts. For example, evaporative coolers, which are more often used in India in on-grid settings, could be adapted to off-grid settings, both in South Asia and hot, dry regions of Sub-Saharan Africa. We also identified that there is still a very strong need for R&D on emerging and existing solutions, but that apply context-appropriate design. For example, market-available air conditioners and evaporative coolers are typically designed to suit an average urban household. But there is a lot of potential for innovation around rural appropriate design. The final core insight I want to share is that cooling in general, but also in rural areas, is not just a technical challenge. In our research, we propose a value-based framework where we consider that solutions must be culturally appropriate, environmentally responsible, and ensure inclusivity. What this means is that when designing both solutions and programs, we consider that this needs to be in ways that reflect local lifestyles and traditions, minimize life cycles, emissions, and waste, use locally available materials, and involve communities meaningfully in the design and implementation process so solutions are accessible and usable. And this human and planet-centered approach ensures that interventions are not only technically feasible, but also are viable in the long term. Finally, I just want to share what this means for programs and policy. We want to share a couple of recommendations. First of all, we recommend that cooling is integrated into development and climate agendas and not treated in a silo. That programs and policy prioritize passive first approaches and combination of passive plus solar power active solutions when needed. The support for R&D to improve the affordability and performance of these rural appropriate active solutions that I was speaking about, and to promote cross-regional knowledge transfer and support demonstration of passive techniques when appropriate. Finally, we believe it's necessary to build strong local ecosystems for design, installation, and maintenance of these solutions for them to be truly viable in the long term. To close, I just want to repeat that we just published our new report of this research. Feel free to download it on the QR code, and I think Mari-Sophie also put it in the chat, but feel free to download if you want to go in a deeper dive of what we did. And if you want to discuss this or explore collaboration opportunities, just please reach out to me at the email that I added there. Thank you so much. Over to you, Genai.
Thank you very much, Florencia, for your insightful presentation. And I mean, this is very important to address the rural needs and their expectation, how we can provide locally tailored, culturally respected cooling solutions. And then you are doing quite a lot of research in Africa and Asia that can demonstrate such needs. So I'm really interested in this report. So please, everyone, also feel free to download from the link and then and read it, and so that we can understand the urgency of addressing this cooling sector in rural settings. So thank you very much again, Florencia. So next, we want to go to the panel discussion, and today we have distinguished speakers from across the world. And then let me first introduce each speaker. And first of all, we have Huda Jaffer, Director, Selco Foundation. And then we have Denis Sam Valentin, Program Management Officer, Climate and Clean Air Coalition, or CCSC. And then we have Simran Sim, Sustainable Finance Specialist, Base Foundation. And lastly, we have Bea Banai, Project Manager, Climate Resilient Housing, JERES. So today, with these four distinguished speakers, we want to have a productive discussion. But first of all, we want to hear a little bit about the insight from each speakers on their project and initiatives. So maybe I can ask the questions first, and then we can hear their response. So first, Huda, uh, so how can space cooling solutions be designed so that they actually work in low income and off-grid context where energy access and affordability remain the main constraint? Yeah, I think it's pretty much related to the report that Florencia just presented, but we want to hear your perspective. Over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us. And it's been wonderful being a part of generating the report and, of course, the team that put it together. Just to kind of give a little bit of a background. So when we approach cooling solutions, we primarily look at it from a sector perspective. What that means is our focus is primarily on livelihoods and public health. And when we are looking at cooling, it's really a catalyst towards improving these outcomes, whether it's a livelihood-driven outcome in terms of income increase, drudgery reduction, or it's a healthcare outcome, right? And so primarily in livelihoods, which I wanted to talk more about today, we focus more on agriculture, animal husbandry, different range and types of micro businesses. And as Florencia was presenting, it is really a combination of passive solutions, not only complete build structures, but also things like PPGI sheets, cool roofs, things which can incrementally also be improved from a cooling perspective. It is a combination of active cooling solutions, so whether it's fans, coolers, air conditioners, etc., and the combination of clean energy input. It doesn't matter if you're completely off-grid, semi-off-grid. A combination of these three factors really sort of make that cooling solution come to life and makes it more effective, right? Because I think we're also trying to design from a long-term perspective, and whether we like it or not, we're all going to be in a frying pan sooner or later, right? So how do we design more from a longer-term perspective? That's really been our effort. So whether it's on agri value chains, right? Small coolers all the way to walk-in coolers, and you need to look at a complete value chain there. We're also seeing a lot of really strong impacts on the animal husbandry side, because it's not only wastage, and it's not only incomes and stability, but it's also directly related to mortality rates. It's also directly related to yield of cows when it comes to dairy, or when it comes to poultry in terms of mortality rates, and heat stress is affecting all of these value chains in a very significant manner, right? Especially like even recently we've started working a lot on the silk value chain, and it's completely disrupting the generation and the ability to actually develop silk value over time, right? So I think somewhere all of these solutions are very directly linked to development outcomes in these verticals. And the way in which we need to make it work is we need to not look at one size fits all. You can actually think all of these micro enterprises, cooperatives, they need different combinations, modules, and different types of solutions that they can access and grow as and when they are growing. And I think that sort of pushes us to look at what is that enabling condition that we can ensure that we provide, right? And so that any end user can access, whether it's a cool roof today, whether it's an active cooling solution tomorrow, whether it's a clean energy input to actually make it complete, the following year, etc., right? And for this, only one aspect is technology, right? And in most cases, we hear technology being blamed when actually the gaps are on the business model, the gaps are on the supply chain, the gaps are on the ownership aspects of it, right? But technology, very critical, just in terms of supply chain servicing, building local value capture on those technology supply chains becomes very critical. The second aspect of it is really integrating it into finance. And I think this is something that we have seen being a complete game changer when it comes to access, right? So providing different types of ticket sizes, whether it's, smaller ticket sizes or more asset-based finance, cooling needs very clear and strong financing products to go along with it, right? When it comes to access, especially for end users. And we've actually seen in places where we've been able to unlock finance, that's where your enterprise level finance and investments can also unlock, right? So that you can actually plan out demand when finance unlocks. So technology, finance, and the third piece which we've seen, which can really catalyze, and especially in places in India where it's being developed, where it's been rolled out very successfully, is when it becomes part of a certain scheme or a certain policy, right? Which means that, let's say there's an agriculture infrastructure development fund, there's a food processing fund, there's a micro businesses fund. When you're integrating cooling within those offerings on from a policy side, it basically gives it a huge boost and a huge catalyst. And from a livelihood perspective, we see cooling as directly linked to productivity, right? Directly linked to income, work hours. And I think this is a complete game changer for most of the micro businesses that we work with, whether there's an active heat source or not. Things like puffed rice making production units, sweet meat making units. People are already working at 40, 45 degrees. So what does that mean really from a productivity perspective? It makes cooling all the more fundamental. So for us, I think, really kind of working and developing these enabling conditions within livelihood sectors so that people don't look at it as an afterthought. I think the main problem today is that you have separate climate action plans, separate cooling action plans, and separate livelihood plans, So I think the convergence piece of it becomes extremely crucial. I'm happy to add more, Jenai, as we go along, but I'll pause there for now. Thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing from the others.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and a very insightful perspective. Especially from the Indian context, and the country is much needed of the support addressing the extreme heat. And then you highlighted the value chain intervention is a very important because every faces the extreme heat problem. And also you mentioned that focusing on the financial scheme, and that is also important, especially focusing on the end users. So, all these things related to into the value chain and also the productivity in the hot climate in India. So, thank you very much for your insight. And so next, we want to hear some perspective from Dennis. So maybe you can speak a little bit about your initiatives first, and then we have one question. So it's been 10 years after Kigali, and then how do we ensure the transition to sustainable cooling stays people-centered while delivering both climate and development benefit? So if you can elaborate a little bit, and that's much appreciated. And over to Dennis.
Thank you. Thank you to the Cool Coalition for inviting us and to Ganai for this question. Let me start by quickly introducing our group or coalition. The UNEP-convened Climate and Clean Air Coalition, or CCAC, is a voluntary partnership of over 101 countries and over 100 intergovernmental organizations and civil society organizations that are committed to protect the climate and improving air quality by reducing what we call superpollutants such as methane, black carbon, tropospheric ozone, and hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs. So as a lot of us know, HFCs are hundreds to thousands more powerful than carbon dioxide in causing harm to the climate, and they're mainly used in the cooling sector. From our scientific assessments, we also know that the world can actually achieve a global reduction of 99.5% of HFCs by 2050 compared to 2010. So we know the potential. We know that fast action to reduce HFCs will help achieve benefits for the environment and for the people living in it. And as UNEP, aside from HFCs, we're also promoting passive cooling. We also promote the improved energy efficiency in the cooling sector. But that information is usually the headlines in the climate community, but that's not all that matters. for when we speak to our beneficiaries. So I think, going back to your question, I think by giving more thought about people-centric approach, we can achieve greater impacts because we're not just talking about the indirect benefits to people from environmental protection, but we can also see and think of strategies that would directly benefit people. For example, and as also mentioned earlier by Felicia, helping create jobs, giving better access to cooling, especially to vulnerable groups such as low income households and women, avoiding environmental dumping of inefficient cooling appliances to developing countries, especially those in experiencing already energy poverty, and helping eradicate world hunger by addressing food loss and waste. So we very much appreciate the launch of this report from Energy Saving Trust that carefully examines the access gap for space cooling in rural communities. Florencia has also shared the need for human and planet-centered solutions that is very interesting and I think should be really spread to all of our stakeholders that have an interest in sustainable cooling. Currently, the CCAC supports countries in HFC reduction with the goal of maximizing environmental and climate benefits of HFC phase down under the Kigali Amendment by promoting early and complementary action on HFCs, supporting strategic actions to minimize emissions throughout the life cycle of cooling equipment, and also, as earlier mentioned, reducing the energy demand associated with new and existing cooling equipment. The CCAC supports countries through our implementing partners. Some of our projects are global, some are regional, and many of them are national. The types of projects that we support include research, policy development, capacity building, and technology demonstrations. And I would just like to share some of the projects that we are implementing that relate to sustainable food cold chains. In Siaya County in Kenya, which is located on the shores of Lake Victoria, smallholder fish farmers, fishermen, and fisherwomen, as well as small-scale traders, experience low incomes due to heavy post-harvest losses. And we know that modern cold chain technology can significantly improve livelihoods in many countries, especially in Africa, by opening up new markets for farm and fisheries produce, reducing post-harvest losses, and hence improving incomes. But due to cost constraints and lack of access to reliable electricity, cold chain technology is really out of reach for most of the farming and fishing communities in Africa. So what we are supporting Siaya County with the help of our partner, the Environmental Compliance Institute in Kenya, to install and demonstrate 2 pilot solar-powered phase change material cold rooms for use by fish farmers, fishermen and women, and small-scale traders. And we are actually collaborating with Indian stakeholders as well in the project. So through this project, we would like to demonstrate the potential of this technology to a level which it can be endorsed or adopted by government authorities and cooling sector enterprises, and hopefully, if successful, catalyze the implementation of this technology for cold chain at scale. So aside from expected benefits for the environment, food, and energy security, we also expect social and economic benefits from the project, such as higher income and gender empowerment, as women are the primary traders in the fish value chain, improved nutrition and health for the communities, as well as job creation and market expansion. I know we don't have enough time to go through more details, but basically we expect the cold rooms to be fully installed and operational in 1 or 2 months. And we are happy to share the results of this project in the coming months once they are available. And in addition to Kenya, we are also supporting Punjab State in India in developing clean cold chain policy and technology. And we're supporting 10 communities in Armenia to reduce super pollutant emissions through improved food systems, organic waste management, and cold chain intervention. So it's really an integrated approach in Armenia that we're doing. And as we know, yesterday was Zero Waste Day, and we know that the world wastes over 1 billion tons of food every year, contributing to 10% of global greenhouse emissions. A lot of the food is wasted and lost, and they are at the same time. We also know that in 2024, 673 million people experienced hunger. So on one hand, you have all of this food that is going to waste and are lost, and on the other hand, we have a problem of hunger in the world. So to summarize my response to your question, Ganai, I would say that to ensure that the Kigali Amendment implementation stays people-centric means implementing an integrated approach and collaborating with the many organizations and individual champions, many of which are connected in this webinar, so that we can learn from each other's experiences and improve to achieve long-lasting positive impacts for the environment as well as the people of today and of the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Your insight is very valuable, and especially great to hear about the CCAC activities to try to involve with the older stakeholders into one platform and making sure that we will reduce the HFC. And also it can lead to the creation of the new job and especially for the helping the women and low income populations. And also we need to make sure to not to dispose of the inefficient cooling appliances and to avoid the leakages of the HFC. And also great to know you are already doing quite a lot in Kenya to demonstrate the technologies and this phase-changing material attached to the cool rooms. Cool rooms would be a very interesting solutions, and we are really looking for the outcomes from there. So thank you very much for your insight. So next, we want to move to the third speaker, Simran Singh, Sustainable Finance Specialist from Base Foundation. So maybe Simran, you can give a little bit about your organizations. And also we have one question like, what role can digital tools play in making community-based cooling systems more reliable, transparent, and scalable in emerging market? So over to you.
Thank you for the question, Ganai. To preface my answer, I would like to point out that I will be focusing a bit more in detail on agricultural cooling, specifically to answer questions about community ownership and utilization of decentralized solar-powered walk-in cold rooms that typically get used by farmers to store their crops, primarily smallholder farmers, many of whom are women. And this is a space that the Base Foundation has been active in since 2021, focusing mainly on business models, digitalization, and capacity bridging for agri-cooling. Now, to understand how digital tools make cooling systems more reliable and scalable, I think we need to take a step back and consider what is actually holding that uptake back at the moment. And I think a very strong theme that has emerged today at the panel as well in the report is that any intervention only succeeds if it's socially just, inclusive, and economically viable. And building on that thought from the perspective of agricultural cooling, what we've learned is that the social infrastructure, by which I mean the governance of and the trust in the cold room itself, is just as important, if not more, in the uptake of the cold room as the physical hardware. There is a tendency that we have in the development sector to skip this trust building phase when we jump straight to high-tech top-down solutions. And as a result, many projects fail not because technology doesn't work, but because communities have not yet seen in extremely tangible terms and also in very everyday terms the benefits of cooling. And just to give you a quick example, something that we were able to do in the case of Guinea-Bissau was for the first time, we were able to enter a market by focusing more on passive cooling, specifically on clay pot coolers, and conduct experiments both in the lab and field to see how they extended the shelf life of different crops. And once this message was passed on through capacity bridging sessions with the farming communities, what the farmers experienced firsthand was it shifted something fundamental. They began to see that they could move away from distress sales or immediate consumption and instead have the time, flexibility, and choice to decide when and how to sell their produce. Just because we're tight on time, I will not be able to go more into the example, but we have a link that has been shared in the chat to tell you more about the experiments that we conducted. Now, once these benefits of cooling are well understood, I think the demand for scale naturally follows. And it is then that it becomes more relevant to introduce active cold rooms, particularly for farmers looking to store larger quantities and to access bigger and more distant markets. Now, once the technology has been chosen on what cold room to establish, there's a new set of questions that emerge, which is who owns the infrastructure, how does it get managed, and how does one get to access it? It is precisely at this point that digital tools become not just helpful, but essential. And one such tool is the Cultivate app that we have developed under Basis, your virtual cold chain assistant project. You will hear more about the app as I go on, but we have a bit more information that will be dropped in the chat again. Now, coming back to the question of ownership and utilization and the role of digital tools, something that we've noticed is that when you introduce a cold room into a new market, the best way to promote its adoption, of course, is to lean into existing structures such as farmer associations or self-help groups as a natural entry point because they carry a level of social legitimacy, which is critical for the long-term management and sustainability of the room. But what they may bring in social legitimacy and their proximity to farmers, they may lack in terms of the legal and commercial capacity to scale, which is why then we need to move into a lot of multi-stakeholder structures that for the governance of the cold room that may involve NGOs, civil society actors, government bodies, quasi-government bodies. And again, just to illustrate what I mean by these multi-stakeholder structures, continuing with the example of Guinea-Bissau, what we saw was that farmer associations are very important to the way that activities are carried out in the agricultural sector, but not all of them are formalized or legalized, which means that they may not be able to enter into formal agreements with an off-taker, which is very important for a farmer to use the room because they want the room to result in some sort of income improvement. And so we had to make sure that the ownership and maintenance of the room was retained by local NGOs, but the farmer associations were integrated in the form of operators of the cold room as people who were linking the cold rooms to the markets or market linkage officers, as we call them. Now, in such multi-actor systems, the cold room becomes a shared economic arrangement that depends a lot on coordination and transparency. And digital tools become a way to record transactions and impact and make operations more visible and accountable, thus supporting these partnership or these hybrid governance structures on which the sustainability of the cold room relies. The next challenge to consider is that of operational complexity. So many of these walk-in cold rooms that we are talking about are multi-commodity cold rooms and operate on a pay-per-use model. So without clear systems, things can quietly unravel. Inventory can be mismanaged, access can become uneven, and the overall utilization of the rooms can fall quite quickly, which then gets in the way of scalability. Digital tools help absorb this complexity, and in particular, the app that we've been working on, which is Cultivate, does so by standardizing the check-in and check-out processes at the cold room, moving away from manual registries that are difficult to maintain, they are error-prone, and do not always provide you with immediate actionable insights. They also help record payments And in the case of multi-commodity rooms, they help you understand what the composition of the room is, which helps determine the best temperature and storage conditions for the room, again, feeding into the trust that the community has in the cold room itself. One particularly powerful feature of Cultivate that I wanted to highlight, just to illustrate also the transformative potential of digitalization and data-driven tools, is its ability to integrate temperature and humidity data from the cold room onto the app to estimate the remaining shelf life of each crate in storage. So when this information becomes available to farmers, we basically make time visible to them, and it allows them to gain more knowledge on how long their produce will last. And therefore, they are able to acquire the ability to plan and act strategically within that window, which means that we're not merely scaling the cold room, but we're also scaling the farmer's power to negotiate a fair price. And the final point that I would like to emphasize is the role of digital tools to help with market linkage. Because digitalization, what we've been able to do in Cultivate is to integrate a marketplace feature which connects the farmers to directly to the buyers. And therefore, the cold rooms move from being passage storage spaces to becoming instruments of negotiation. So to conclude, digital tools really become the enabler that help cold rooms become something that the communities can trust, that make the cold rooms and their operations more transparent, and give the power to the farmers to plan, negotiate, and thrive. So with that, I pass the word back to you, Genai. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simran. Very interesting perspective on how the digital tool can help the local farmers and also its association, like properly tracking the transactions and all the activities, including like temperature and humidities, to ensure that the produce are safely stored. So thank you very much. And so lastly, we want to go through the last speaker, Bea Banai, Project Manager, Climate Resilient Housing, JERAS. So maybe, Bea, you can give us a little bit about your organization's overview. And then our question is that from your work on climate resilient housing, what are successful strategies to overcome pilot interventions and scale passive and low energy cooling in the built environment? We are run out of time, but yeah, please, let me give you a floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Janae. Thank you for the invitation. So our contribution as JERAS to the Cooling the Last Mile report focused on low-tech thermal retrofit solutions and generally low-cost improvements for rural housing, though they could be applied really to other settings as well. So it's great that I come last because many of the things that are sort of the first consideration for what I wanted to share with you today was already shared in terms of the main barrier to scaling such solutions doesn't lie in the technical innovation. You've mentioned this before, but very much in terms of bridging the knowledge and awareness gap, bridging availability gaps of materials sometimes, and the financial affordability as well. And previous speakers also spoke to the lack of business or distribution models. So basically what I wanted to bring to your attention today is an example or a case that we've been sort of supporting as JERAS. We are a nonprofit organization and we work on just climate transition, climate solidarity. And in Myanmar, we support and help to launch a last mile distribution network, which is called Alin 10. So this is basically a network that is brings together today about 200 women entrepreneurs that in their communities address these needs of the rural populations, basically in terms of access to affordable and energy efficient appliances, be it for cooking or other domestic appliances, solar products and such. And once this network was sort of up and running, what we helped support, or what we are supporting currently as well, is to add basically a housing retrofit service to the scope of activities of this network. So the idea is really to introduce small-scale, low-tech, and low-cost retrofit solutions that enhance thermal comfort for households and rural communities. So retrofitting, improving their existing housing units. And they're designed with the rural communities. So based on their preferences and needs, we are monitoring them and sort of incrementally improving through a test and learn approach. I saw that in the chat, there was a question around like, how to make sure that the solutions that we're promoting are adapted to actual needs and preferences of rural communities. So this is one of the things that we're doing, and I think many of my colleagues can also speak to that. So basically, the main point here is that this last mile distribution network, and specifically the women entrepreneurs, they have the central role in mobilizing and raising awareness around thermal comfort and also health issues linked to that among the households, but also of identifying and training local craftsmen, connecting them with the households, so really make this connection between demand and offer happen, and also to provide through the last mile distribution network payment facilities and enhance the accessibility, really the financial accessibility of the retrofit solutions. For instance, just to mention a very basic example, but still powerful example in terms of, for instance, doing bulk purchases, grouping together demands and retrofits in bigger chunks, and therefore reducing the overall costs. So really, this is the role of this last mile distribution network. I believe this is something that could be relevant in other contexts as well, where there might be similar social businesses already in place, or that could build upon these kind of experiences. And I think this is basically what I wanted to bring to the table today, just in terms of an opportunity and example of how we can combine these low-tech innovations with a social business and value chain-based approach, so that we ensure basically that these cooling interventions or retrofit solutions in this case are not only technically feasible, which of course is the basics, but also socially viable and sustainable, because there's of course also the question of once retrofits happen, how do you follow up on basically the maintenance and any other issues related to that. So I think I will leave it at this so that we can have a few minutes of discussion, and thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bea, for your insight, and great to hear your initiatives in Myanmar, working on the energy efficient appliances and solar and housing solutions, especially like retrofitting perspective. That's much appreciated. So we have 5 minutes left. So maybe we can pick up a couple questions from the audience. We already received several questions. So maybe we can address from the top the first questions. So it's basically about the retrofitting. So Sumitra is asking, like, passive cooling is fundamental, and this is very important. And then, is there any opportunity to redesign existing spaces, as retrofitting can be highly limiting, like cool coating atop metal corrugated would be inappropriate? I mean, I think this is about the challenge of how to address the retrofitting of the building. I mean, new building would be a little bit easier than retrofitting, but when it's come to the retrofitting, there are many issues such as cost and then also feasibility of the changing structures and then so on. So, but maybe we can hear from our expert how we should ensure to do the appropriate retrofitting project. So, anyone wants to maybe speak? Please raise your hand. Maybe. Yes. So, Bea, yes, please.
Yes, maybe I can start and others can add. But I guess one element of response is that generally, I guess it's not only looking at, the thermal comfort as such, and also not just retrofitting for one specific, let's say, need, but rather the idea is to link the retrofitting approach into a general like improvement and enhancement of the living or housing conditions, and to integrate basically energy efficiency, but also thermal comfort aspects into that enhancement or improvement. And maybe since I have the word, I will just sort of make the link with the last question, which is around like thermal comfort standards that are different from, different contexts and spaces. So I think there again, the question is around, what are the preferences and needs of the communities or specifically the households that you're working with? Thermal comfort is not necessarily the first priority, but it's linked to many other issues. I think some of my colleagues have also mentioned, around health impacts on others, not necessarily in the housing sector, but in other sectors. But we can make the parallel for housing in terms of, thermal comfort is also linked to health conditions, housing conditions. So it's really looking also at the sort of in a holistic way at the problem and not just focusing on maybe thermal comfort metrics, but rather like user perceptions and user experience, or in this case, household experience.
Okay, then we also have one more question from Smitra. The second question is, any chance innovators can have access to a community in need to conduct field research so as to design solutions driven by user needs rather than what we think is best? So, is there, okay, so Huda, please.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we work across different climate contexts and with different types of communities. So whether it's drought-prone, heat stress, flood-prone, small and marginal farmers, women entrepreneurs, I think context-wise, there is a wide range of communities and typologies available. So anyone who is listening in and wants to understand things better, innovate, test, please do reach out to us anytime. I'm happy to share my contact and we'll be happy to facilitate and co-design and work with you. So yeah, just wanted to respond on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Huda. Okay, so now we are 4 o'clock and in the European time, and now we are closing the end of today's webinar. And actually we have one more question, but this was already answered by Bear. It's about thermal comfort in the rural settings. So thank you very much for all the panelists, and we really appreciate your insights. So, and also thank you very much everyone who joined today's webinars. What came through clearly is that rural space cooling is not a secondary issue. It is a climate and health and energy access priority affecting over 1 billion people. And the solutions already exist. What is needed now is stronger policy integration, targeted financing, and the kind of evidence base that cooling the last mile provides. And also I think that also all the speakers are already doing quite a lot of pilot demonstration project on the ground, and then these outcomes would be definitely feed into the future recommendation to the policymakers and practitioners. Thank you very much for your all the insight. And finally, and today's summary article and also the recording will be published on our Cool Coalition website shortly. And our next Cool Talk on district cooling, which will take place on 21st April. So please everyone save the date. We will talk about district cooling in a hot environment. And so with that, today that is all about. And thank you very much for your engagement and for advancing sustainable cooling beyond cities. And have a nice rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.